What does the hire of Todd Monken mean for Lamar Jackson and his future with the Baltimore Ravens? We talk about that, get into Monken's scheme and experience. Also talk about some roster moves and potential roster moves to the Ravens as the 2023 offseason continues. All next year coming up on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire. We're here as always on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here with us and tuning in, making us your first listen each and every day. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms. That also includes over in video form on YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On today to get started. And we're back here. It is a Thursday edition, and we're now in the Todd Monken era for the Baltimore Ravens as the Ravens hiring Todd Monken on Tuesday. A nice Valentine's Day treat for everybody. And he's the guy now, as the Ravens obviously parted ways with Greg Roman. Monken now in after a very extensive, the Ravens and John Harbaugh, kind of clarified the process, said it was 14 candidates, 21 interviews, but Monken is the guy that wins out. But today in the first time, we're going to be diving into what this could mean for the future of Lamar Jackson, because obviously the offensive coordinator hire was one that was really the second biggest domino, I'd say, of the offseason for the Ravens so far. The first is what happens with Lamar. Now we can kind of focus our full attention on that. Hopefully something gets resolved soon, but I want to dive into if this Monken hire has any impact on the future of Lamar and what it could mean for Lamar with Baltimore moving forward. Then in the second segment, I do just want to continue to dive into Todd Monken and talk about his scheme, his experience, his style, and a lot more. Just kind of getting to know Todd Monken a little bit more, as this is a very important hire, and I hope the Ravens got it right here. We'll talk about that in the second segment. Then finally, we'll be talking about some roster moves the Ravens made on Wednesday, and also some potential roster moves based off of some cryptic tweets by a Ravens player. So we'll get into all that here today. First, though, if you're here with us in audio form, I appreciate all of the audio listeners out there. Be sure to follow along anywhere you get your podcasts, and thank you for listening, whether you're on your way to work or on your way home from work or whatever you're doing. Thank you for tuning in audio form. Also, video form, we are on YouTube. If you're here on YouTube, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. We're actually pretty close to 3,500 subscribers on YouTube. It's a mini milestone. The real milestone's 4,000, but I greatly appreciate everybody who is subscribed and who continues to tune in. So if you're new here, or if you continue to tune in and haven't subscribed quite yet, I personally highly recommend you do so. I personally recommend the show, but thank you for being here, both audio and video form. But let's now talk about Todd Monken and Lamar Jackson, this partnership, what it could mean for the two. So going back to the Greg Roman days, people wanted to see just consistency, is the word, consistency from this offense. And we just didn't get it enough from Greg Roman, where I said even, before the season ended, it just felt like the relationship between the Ravens and between Greg Roman was just stale. It wasn't going anywhere. The offense wasn't growing enough. And I think with Todd Monken, you can grow the offense specifically around Lamar Jackson, just like everybody wanted to see after that 2019 season, where 2019, Greg Roman's first year, comes in, does a really good job. He's able to get this offense to be a historic rushing offense. They were also a top 10 passing offense that year too. So you're kind of looking at that and you're thinking, sure, some of the numbers they put up in 2019 weren't necessarily sustainable. I get that. I understand it. So there was going to be statistical regression in some categories, much like we talked about with Lamar too, where I think some people, and myself, I was talking about how statistical regression in 2020 was kind of inevitable in some areas, but I wanted efficiency numbers. People wanted efficiency numbers to go up. We saw efficiency from Lamar Jackson, but efficiency from the offense dropped that season a little bit. They couldn't find their identity for like the first 2 months of the season. With Todd Monken, the Ravens always struggled to kind of be this passing team where, look, in some areas, you had really nice passing games and really nice growth from both Lamar and Greg Roman. But with Todd Monken, he has shown a demonstrated ability to be able to get the best out of his personnel. And I think Greg Roman could not do that to the fullest ability. And that, I think, held back Lamar Jackson. with Lamar, people want to see him. People have wanted to see him in that non-Greg Roman offense in Baltimore. Now is that opportunity, or even if the Ravens kept Greg Roman, it would have been not in Baltimore. They wanted to see him not in a Greg Roman offense. But regardless, this is now the opportunity. I think this is the coach where he gives you enough flexibility if you're the Ravens. And we'll talk about this a bit in the second segment, where if Lamar leaves, he can adapt to the personnel necessary, and it wouldn't just be a total, the offensive coordinator gambled on Lamar being here and it didn't happen. I think Todd Monken understands that, there's a chance Lamar's not in Baltimore in 2023, and he just said, you know what, we're gonna do the thing, whether it's with or without Lamar. And Josina Anderson put out a lot of great information on Tuesday, just about the hire and Todd Monken's interest level from other teams. But the one tweet from her, and I talked about it a bit on the live show that we did right after the instant reaction, is Josina Anderson put out, quote, "I'm told since the day after the Ravens and Greg Roman parted ways, quarterback Lamar Jackson's input on the offense from a philosophical and schematic standpoint was folded into the evaluation process for the next OC, and communication from key players was welcomed per league source." This to me is a very positive sign. Obviously, my overall arching take on whether this Monken hire, impacts the future for Lamar at all, I think it could. I definitely think it could. I think with that Josina Anderson tweet factored in, I think Lamar did have input in this. At least the organization talked to him. Maybe he wasn't a part of the actual final hiring process, but I think Lamar probably gave the organization maybe a list, or maybe he just told him things that he would value in the offense he wants to be in. And if Monken checks off those boxes, Monken checks off those boxes. And I think that the Ravens, it's kind of like, it's not a complete loss if Lamar leaves. Like, obviously, I hope the Ravens extend him, and I want him to be in Baltimore. But with Monken, I think he can do it both with and without Lamar. Now, the thing is, the offense is worlds better with Lamar. Like, that's just what it is. So in this situation, what Todd Monken can maybe sell Lamar Jackson on, or what the Ravens can sell Lamar on with this hire, is the fact that Monken comes from an air raid experience. Like, his game, he profiles it. He likes to throw. He is an air raid guy, but he has had success with run heavy schemes, run heavy personnel, and he can do both. And I've said it, and I'm continuing to say it now. If you give this Ravens offense balance, the way that they run the football, they don't have to abandon everything they did from the Greg Roman offense. They can keep the stuff that is good, and then Todd Monken can come in and work with the things that they need to improve on, work on the red zone offense, work on better play calling, and kind of being in tune. It just seemed like things were out of sync. And towards the end of the year, last year, the vibe just seemed off between the Ravens and Greg Roman. I mean, John Harbaugh was publicly calling him out a little bit. And, regardless of if it was intentional or not, that's what it came off as to me. I think this is a hire that is going to pay off dividends for the Ravens. And I think it is one that is definitely not going to push Lamar Jackson out of town. I think if they kept Greg Roman, that might have done it, where Lamar just says, I'm not getting the guaranteed money. This is a situation where I'm going to see what's out there and maybe explore some stuff and figure that out. But with this, I think that you can pitch Lamar on this. I definitely think you can. I think it's a positive sign what Josina Anderson put out there about Lamar having, and key players as well having input. This is an organization that values the opinions of everybody, and we have seen that time and time again. And for Lamar, whoever his next offensive coordinator is, so many people just want to see him be able to spread his wings in that offense. And with Todd Monken being able to play to his personnel, I think he will be able to make everybody feel involved while also putting them in roles that will help them succeed. So, I mean, look, Patrick Ricard is great at what he does. Should he be split out wide on some of these third downs? Probably not. He probably shouldn't be. So I think Todd Monken, you don't have to trade away a Patrick Ricard in the situation if you still want to be a run-heavy team, because Ricard is really good at being a fullback, and he's good at blocking. He's versatile, and he's good. But I think Todd Monken can put Ricard and these other players in key positions, and that in turn will help Lamar, will help the offense. So what does Todd Monken mean for Lamar Jackson's future? I don't look, it's not all right, Lamar's definitely staying because Todd Monken is hired. That's not what it is. Obviously, the overarching issue here for the Ravens and Lamar Jackson has been the sticking point of guaranteed money. But I think now with Monken, you at least have something to say to Lamar. Well, look, now we know that we can maximize our skill set a little better, and especially with hopefully what is the Ravens' commitment to not overhauling, but looking at the wide receiver room, you can give Lamar a guy because, everybody's talking about how, look, the Ravens went out there and their mission seems like just beef up that offensive line. Make sure the offensive line can protect Lamar and can block in the run game and is really solid. And what do we see them do? They sign Morgan Moses. They draft Tyler Linderbaum in the first round. You have Ronnie Stanley come back, which is huge. Kevin Zeitler did his Kevin Zeitler thing, and Ben Powers played really well. So now I call that the offseason of the offensive lineman in the safety position with Marcus Williams and Kyle Hamilton. Now what I hope this offseason will be is the offseason of the wide receiver and the cornerback. Those are the two that I wish the Ravens will be able to put a lot of focus into. And I think if you give Lamar a DeAndre Hopkins, a Mike Evans, a Chris Godwin, whoever, that number one guy, or second option for me is 2 number 2s on the free agent market, but I would prefer the number one. That to me is something where Todd Monken can then use those guys. Or part of the issue with Greg Roman was the receivers just were not getting used in that offense. And it was one, I believe, pushing receivers away from even coming to Baltimore in the first place. It took a very specific wide receiver to want to come to the Ravens and play. But 2, you then give Lamar more weapons, and Lamar deserves more weapons, and he has deserved more weapons for many, many years now. That Josh Allen arc with Stephon Diggs, the Kyler Murray arc with DeAndre Hopkins and Marquise Brown, the Jalen Hurts arc with A.J. Brown. It's that type of move that Lamar deserves, and if that move is made, I believe Todd Monken can use those guys better than Greg Roman could, and that in turn could maybe help out Lamar in saying, yeah, you know what, this is a good situation for me. And, whatever happens with the contract happens with the contract. But that's the thing, though. The contract is the big deal right now in terms of what are the Ravens going to be willing to give guarantee-wise. Will Lamar budge on his guarantee asking price? That's really what it comes down to. But I do think the Todd Monken hire is a positive step in the right direction, not only for the future of Lamar Jackson. I think it doesn't hurt, but I think more importantly, it's a positive step in the direction of the offense that will hopefully include Lamar Jackson moving forward. And coming up here on Locked On Ravens, we'll be talking a bit about Monken and his scheme, his experience, his style of coaching, and a lot more. Again, getting to know Todd Monken a little better. So be sure to stay tuned. Still lots to dive into here on the show. But first, this episode is brought to you by Built Bar. And if you're looking for a delicious treat but don't want all the fat and calories, then you have to try a Built Bar. We just got through the holidays a little while ago, and I know for me, my goal is to eat a little healthier this year. And if you're like me where you want to eat healthier but don't want to compromise taste, then I've got just the thing for you. And Built Healthy is actually tasty. They're so delicious you won't even think they're good for you because they are that tasty. And what makes Built Bars so good? Well, for starters, they're covered in 100% real chocolate, and they come in unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and coconut almond. And they only have 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and a whopping 17 grams of protein. And now you don't even have to wait around to get a box. For years, I've been talking about ordering your Built Bars at Built.com. Well, now you can get them at your local Walmart or even a Sam's Club. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart today, walk to the pharmacy section, and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can pick up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream double chocolate and coconut puffs. And if you're close to a Sam's Club, run in and grab a 13-bar box with hit flavors such as brownie batter and churro. So get your hands on a Built Bar now. You can thank me later. And we return here, our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with you again. Thank you so much for tuning in with us today, making us your first listen here on Locked On Ravens. Again, free and available on all platforms, podcast-wise, including on YouTube. You can subscribe to us on YouTube, follow along in audio form again on YouTube. Really close to 3,500 subscribers, a mini milestone there when we hit it, so I greatly appreciate all the support. But let's now talk about Todd Monken. Let's get to know Todd Monken a little more. We talked about this on the live show on Tuesday afternoon, also with Cordell Woodland on Wednesday. So if you want to go check out those episodes, personally highly recommend that. But for Todd Monken in particular, again, has a plethora of coaching experience, both at the college and the NFL level. Comes over from Georgia, where he won back-to-back national championships as the offensive coordinator there and the pass game guy. So again, he comes from a system. He comes from a background. He's an air raid guy, but he has success adapting to the personnel, as we talked about in the first segment, and working with the run game and having success with the run game. And I'll point first to his NFL tenure as the offensive coordinator, both for Tampa Bay from 2016 to 2018, and then Cleveland in 2019. This is an important aspect of this whole thing. So obviously, Monken takes over, offensive coordinator, 2016 for Tampa. The first season, it wasn't necessarily wonderful. He was he had the 18th best passing offense, and then the 29th best rushing offense. So numbers that you're like, not wonderful. 2017, the rushing offense still wasn't great, 27th in the league, but the pass offense moved up to 10th in the league. So top 10 passing offense, hey, you know what? That's pretty good. Obviously for him, he was working with Jameis Winston at quarterback, also had Ryan Fitzpatrick there for a couple of starts. 2018, he ends up having the second best passing offense in the league. The rushing offense was not good. It was second to last in the league, but we saw continued growth from the passing offense where, again, he's catering to his personnel where you have Ryan Fitzpatrick and Jameis Winston. Obviously, Winston was the guy who they were banking a lot of their future on. He was the number 1 overall pick. Seems like years and years and years ago. But, their top running back in 2018 was Peyton Barber. And they had Jaquiz Rogers and Ronald Jones. So their team wasn't built to run. They were built to pass. And then you had Mike Evans, who had 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons under Todd Monken. Now, then, obviously, they make the coaching change. Bruce Arians comes in 2019. They completely overhaul their staff. Byron Leftwich gets that job. And that's just how it went. So Monken, 3 years in Tampa. So he goes to Cleveland. And Cleveland's offense was more run-oriented at that time, where Cleveland ended up being a team that, despite not necessarily a ton of rushing attempts, had the 4th best rush offense in the league, 4.8 yards per attempt. Now, Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, 2 very quality running backs there. Nick Chubb had almost 1,500 yards on the ground. Baker Mayfield for 2019 had a decent year. His touchdown interceptions, he had 22 touchdowns, 21 interceptions, but both Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham Jr. had over 1,000 yards receiving that year. Plus, he still played to the personnel in the run game there. So he has had a top 2 pass offense and a top 4 rush offense in the NFL with 2 different teams. Like, he had the top 2 pass offense with Tampa and the top 4 rush offense with Cleveland. To me, that's saying that Monken can come in and still be somebody who, look, even if the Ravens run game, like if that's not the focus of the offseason for the Ravens, if the Ravens really focus on getting the pass game down, getting that right, and making sure that's good for week 1 and for the season, I think the way the Ravens have run the ball these past 4 years, they're not just going to all of a sudden go down to like a mid-tier rushing team. They have the personnel with J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, and the offensive line we saw played really, really well for them. And they're only potentially losing 1 starter in Ben Powers, who I personally don't think is back, but you can replace Ben Powers and still be okay if you're returning 4 of your 5 starters on that line. And then on top of that, if you're a Todd Monken, again, coming in, his Georgia tenure, like 2022 Georgia-wise, his team averaged over 40 points per game, which ranked, I think that was tied for 4th with Alabama, and then averaged over 500 yards per game, which is incredible. I mean, for a Georgia team that, look, I'm not going to sit here and say Georgia's roster isn't talented. They have playmakers. I'm completely acknowledging that, but they're not 2019 LSU. They're not some of those Alabama teams that just have loads and loads. It's like Devonta Smith and all these guys on that team, the Jerry Judys of the world and everything like that. They didn't have a ton of those guys. So Todd Monken made those guys back-to-back national champions. Again, not disputing talent. They have talent. But again, he took a team with Stenson Bennett and made them back-to-back national champions. So that counts for something in my book. And I think Monken, in terms of like what the Ravens are looking for and what the Ravens need as an offensive coordinator, I think Monken fits that bill where I don't know if they could have afforded to kind of wait for a Dave Canales or a Brian Angelicchio or some of those guys who haven't been play callers at the NFL level before to get acclimated with it. I think they needed someone with experience, and I think Todd Monken does give them that. Obviously, he does with what we just talked about. And another key aspect in this, and kind of tying into the Lamar future thing from the first segment, there were reports that came out yesterday. I think Jordan Schultz was the one to put it out about how offensive coordinator candidates who interviewed with the Ravens were not given full assurances that Lamar Jackson will be the quarterback next season. Baltimore is clear it wants Lamar back, but truly doesn't know what the offseason holds. And then Banks, Barstool Banks, who does have connections with the team, he is usually spot on when he puts stuff out, said that he heard that it was understandably a point of contention for numerous candidates, Zach Robinson in particular. And he also says, have to think the team put a lot of value on Todd Monken's ability to cater an offense to a variety of personnel. And I completely agree with him. That's exactly what I think this was, where I'm sure some offensive coordinators probably heard something like that if that's what the Ravens said to them. And they said, I like it with Lamar, but without Lamar, I don't know if this is what I want to take. I don't know if this is the job I want. I think for the Ravens, their offensive coordinator position was the most attractive option on the market. with an asterisk that says with Lamar Jackson. Without Lamar Jackson, there are a lot more uncertainties, and you kind of go through who's the quarterback. Is it a rookie? Is it a bridge mid-tier guy? Lamar Jackson is a franchise quarterback for the Ravens or for somebody else. That's just what it is what I've been saying. So I get that. I understand it. So I'm sure that both avenues here were true, where I'm sure Lamar was looking at the offensive coordinator situation, just, maybe monitoring it. And then for offensive coordinators, they were probably monitoring the Lamar situation and being like, when is this going to be resolved, and how likely is it Lamar's back in Baltimore in 2023? So both sides there I get to. Justina Anderson also putting out a couple of really good tweets saying that she was told the Ravens decided on Todd Monken as a new offensive coordinator because he's a great teacher, versatile, has a great handle on the new age and traditional aspects of football, has experience calling plays, knows how to keep the room light, but is still demanding. And that's big too. And then also the determination on the final makeup and tapestry of the Ravens offensive staff will include a collaborative effort between John Harbaugh and new offensive coordinator Todd Monken. Per a league source, more decisions to come soon. And she also put out there that Monken is well respected, and her understanding is that Monken has strong interest from Tampa Bay and Georgia, who was also applying pressure for the decision. And so Monken was someone who was wanted, who was a wanted guy, and the Ravens end up securing his services. Interest from another NFL team. Georgia felt like wanted him back. And a lot of the response from the Georgia faithful, the Georgia fan base was, dang, we really didn't want him to leave. So I think the Ravens got a good one here. And there's a lot to like about what Monken can do. He likes the extension of the run game, which is the short passing game, screen passes. Hopefully we'll be able to see red zone offense. I think will be improved. The Ravens had a putrid red zone offense, so hopefully that'll be better this year. But there's a lot to like in this hire. I mean, for me, my top three again were Eric Bieniemy, Brian Johnson, and Todd Monken. Any of those three guys I thought could have come in and done a really good job here. I still don't know what's going on with Eric Bieniemy. I think he's more than deserving of not just the offensive coordinator, but a head coaching opportunity. But for the Ravens, Todd Monken's their guy. I think they did a good job. I think the hire was a good one for Baltimore. But coming up in our final segment, we'll be talking a bit about some roster moves the Ravens made yesterday, as well as a potential one based off of some cryptic tweets from a Ravens player. So be sure to stay tuned. So lots to dive into on Locked On Ravens. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And the midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and even threes drained. The Denver Nuggets, they're my team. They keep winning. They go into the All-Star break for them with the best record in the Western Conference. But for the All-Star game, if you want to bet dunk contest winners, three-point contest winners, All-Star game MVP, FanDuel, do it over there. And I'm sure those money lines will be changing over the course of the next couple of days here. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay. And they have so many more exclusive bets like the 2x3, which is 2 3-pointers scored in the first 3 minutes. So don't miss a chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. We return here, our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with you. Thank you again for tuning in with us today, making us your first listen on Locked On Ravens. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube, follow along in audio form as well if you are here with us today, whether you're new or you're coming back to the show. But let's now dive into some roster moves that the Ravens made yesterday. They bring back both Brent Urban and Daryl Worley. Now, these are two solid moves. Are they needle movers? No, they're not. But you need depth at the NFL level, absolutely. Urban and Worley can give you that. Starting off with Urban, someone who obviously was with Baltimore, was a draft pick of Baltimore back in 2014, played for Baltimore for 4 seasons, went on a stint. He went to Chicago, played in Dallas, was with Tennessee, and then came back to Baltimore last season. I mean, a really solid depth defensive lineman where he actually made some plays in the run game, and he's a tall guy. He's like him and Calais Campbell. You have two big guys in the middle of that defensive line. So I like this. I'm glad the Ravens were able to bring Urban back. It seems like he really likes being in Baltimore. And he's someone who, he's not your top defensive lineman, but he can provide you positive snaps in limited snaps, which I think is important. And then for Daryl Worley, he was kind of like the taxi squad guy. It seemed like every game he would be called up from the practice squad, cut, added back to the practice squad, called up, cut, added back, called up, cut. So it was like that cycle. And then actually made a couple of plays. I mean, I know that week 18 game when the Ravens rested some guys, he was in there and he made a couple of plays. Now, again, this is something where, look, you don't want to rely on Daryl Worley to play significant snaps every week. But if it's in a break glass in case of emergency aspect and you need him for a game or two, he knows the system. He's been with Baltimore on and off for a couple of years now. I don't hate that. Like, I think both those moves, again, they're solid depth signings. It's not going to move any needles, but you need depth in this league if you want to win. And for the Ravens, two guys familiar with their system and on a defense that really stepped it up over the course of those final 2.5 months of the season for them. So solid moves. But then there was an interesting kind of, I guess, I don't even know what to call it. I don't know if it was drama or not, but apparently Patrick Queen, wiped all of his pictures, Ravens pictures on Instagram, and then took to Twitter. And Derek Stingley, who's the Texans cornerback, played with Patrick Queen at LSU, ended up putting eyeball emojis and tagging Patrick Queen. And then Patrick Queen put the eyeball emojis back, and everyone's freaking out, being like, oh, Patrick Queen's going to Houston, or Derek Stingley's coming to Baltimore. So it's like, what is going on? And it raises a point. And the whole point I brought this up was to just talk about this specific situation where I don't know what the deal is with Patrick Queen. I don't believe he's moved this offseason. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe something comes out in these next couple of days. I'm not sure. But for Patrick Queen, there is a real question as to what his future is in Baltimore with the Roquan Smith signing. Roquan Smith signing a 5-year, $100 million contract with the Ravens. And for him and Patrick Queen play really well next to each other. Patrick Queen stepped his game up a ton. Even before Roquan Smith came in, I do want to give Patrick Queen credit. Roquan Smith came in and did great things to that defense. But Patrick Queen was playing well even before Roquan Smith came in. And Patrick Queen's a very talented linebacker. But the question is, look, I think Patrick Queen deserves to get paid. I think he's going to get paid a lot of money by somebody. But do the Ravens have enough financial flexibility in 2 years to pay Patrick Queen when maybe Lamar, if Lamar signed to an extension, if that cap hit number starts to go up pretty significantly? I don't know if the Ravens can afford to pay 2 linebackers significant contracts. So that begs the question, just what do you do with Patrick Queen? I think it's beneficial, at least for this season. There's still a while before you really have to figure out what to do with Patrick Queen if you're the Ravens. I think for this season, like coming up in 2023, I think you should keep him. I think the duo played really, really well together. Queen, I think, is still growing, and you can decide what to do maybe after this season when you decide on what you're going to do 5th year wise, and whether that's an offseason, maybe move on and trade him for something or risk losing him for a 3rd round comp pick during the next offseason. So I don't know what the whole crypticness of everything was. I'm sure Patrick Queen was just having fun, honestly. Like, I'm not putting too much stock into that whole thing. But there is kind of like a bigger point to the whole situation where it's what do you do with Patrick Queen, where I think Patrick Queen's a good player. I predict that the Ravens probably don't keep 2 big money linebackers. Now, that conversation could change if the Ravens move on from Lamar. Then obviously you have a bit more flexibility if you're the Ravens, but then what do you do at quarterback? But in that case, if you're not committing a $20 million cap hit or $30 million cap hit every year to Lamar, then maybe you can afford to keep 2 linebackers. You can afford to keep a player at a position that maybe you couldn't if you had Lamar under a big contract. Now, obviously, I still hope Lamar is the guy and he's still back in Baltimore, but it does provide interesting viewpoints as to how the roster could be constructed, both with and without Lamar. Which one of those routes the Ravens will take, obviously, we'll find out here in probably a couple weeks or months based off of the franchise tag that many are expecting Lamar to get if no deal is reached, and then what happens from that franchise tag if it happens, whether it's a trade or an extension from there. So for Patrick Queen, a player that I think can really help the Ravens defense for the next couple of years here. And then is that contract being update starts to creep up on the Ravens and Queen. That's when they can decide. And that's when we can have those real conversations about, well, now it's really time to extend him, or now it's really time to move on. But if the Ravens lose him and they get a 3rd round comp pick back for him, I feel like in that case, I'd only move Patrick Queen for a 2nd or more. I'm not moving him for a mid-round pick. I think he's too valuable and too good for the Ravens to do that, especially with how he played with Roquan Smith and on that defense and what he did and how he improved his game. So that's just me. But for me, I think Baltimore still has time. In fact, they do still have time to figure out the whole Patrick Queen situation. But an interesting development that happened on social media yesterday. So we will see. We will monitor and see if anything happens. But I personally don't expect to see anything happen with that. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in with us today. When we get back here tomorrow, we'll be rounding out the week with more Ravens content. So be sure to stay tuned for that, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow.